The wind howled across the lonely plains like a wounded animal searching for shelter. Snow fell in thick, restless waves, burying the dirt road and swallowing every trace of the world beyond the hills. Inside a small wooden cabin at the edge of the valley, a lone man sat quietly beside a crackling fire. His name was Daniel Carter, a man the nearby townsfolk called the Quiet Cowboy. Years ago, he had been known for his courage and laughter, but life had slowly carved silence into his soul. After losing his wife and child to sickness during a harsh winter, Daniel left the busy town behind and built this cabin far away from people and memories. Out here, he lived with only his horse, his tools, and the comforting sound of the fire that burned every night. That evening the storm was worse than any Daniel had seen in years. The wind slammed against the wooden walls as if trying to break in. Snowflakes clung to the window like ghostly hands. Daniel added another log to the fire, staring into the flames while memories flickered through his mind. For a moment, he wondered how many winters a man could survive alone before loneliness became heavier than the cold. Just as he was about to pour himself a cup of coffee, a faint sound reached his ears. Knock, knock. Daniel froze. For a moment he thought the wind had tricked him. Nobody traveled these roads during storms like this. But then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Slowly, Daniel stood and grabbed his lantern. His boots creaked against the wooden floor as he walked toward the door. Outside, the storm roared like a furious beast. He opened the door cautiously, expecting perhaps a lost traveler or maybe a neighbor whose wagon had broken down. But what he saw made him pause in complete silence. Standing there in the snow was a young woman, trembling from head to toe. Her coat was thin and soaked with melting snow. Strands of dark hair clung to her pale face, and her eyes looked exhausted as though she had been running from something for miles. She hesitated for a moment before speaking in a voice barely louder than the wind. "May I warm up by your fire?" she whispered. Daniel looked at her carefully. Something about the way she stood, fragile yet determined, reminded him of someone he had once loved. Without another word, he stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in before the storm decides to keep you forever," he said quietly. The woman stepped inside, her frozen boots leaving small puddles on the floor as snow melted around her. The warmth of the fire wrapped around her like a blanket. She moved closer to it, holding her shaking hands toward the flames. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel placed another log in the fireplace and handed her a dry wool blanket. She wrapped it around her shoulders gratefully. "Thank you," she said softly. "I thought I might freeze out there tonight." Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. "You don't look like someone who belongs out in a storm," he said calmly. "Where were you headed?" The woman stared into the fire as if searching for courage in the dancing flames. "Away," she answered after a long pause. Daniel noticed the faint bruise near her wrist and the tired sadness hiding behind her eyes. He had seen that look before, in soldiers returning from war and in travelers escaping broken lives. "Sometimes away is the only direction left," he said quietly. She looked up at him, surprised by the understanding in his voice. "My name is Emily," she said. Daniel nodded slightly. "Daniel." The storm continued raging outside, but inside the cabin the fire glowed brighter. Slowly, Emily began to speak. She told him how she had left the town that morning after realizing the life she had been living was slowly destroying her spirit. She had worked for a cruel man who treated her like a servant rather than a human being. Every day felt heavier than the last, until finally she decided to leave with nothing but hope and a small bag of belongings. But hope, she admitted with a weak smile, had not prepared her for a storm like this. Daniel listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. After she finished speaking, silence filled the room again. The fire crackled softly between them. Then Daniel spoke words that would stay with her forever. "You know something, Emily," he said gently. "Sometimes the worst storms are the ones that push us toward the place we were meant to find." Emily blinked, surprised. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No judgment, no pity, just quiet belief. For the first time in a very long while, warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Outside, the storm raged harder, but inside the cabin something else had begun to grow, a fragile spark of hope neither of them expected. And neither of them knew yet that this unexpected night would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue to the next chapter, take a quick moment to support stories like this. If you enjoy powerful, emotional storytelling that touches the heart, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps bring more inspiring stories to life. The storm outside did not calm for hours. Snow piled against the cabin walls until the windows looked like they were framed by white mountains. But inside, the fire burned warmly, filling the small room with a comforting glow. Emily sat wrapped in the blanket, slowly regaining the warmth in her hands. Daniel watched the flames quietly, his mind drifting back through memories he rarely allowed himself to visit. It had been years since someone else had sat beside this fire. Years since laughter or conversation had filled this lonely cabin. Yet somehow the presence of this stranger didn't feel strange at all. Emily broke the silence first. "You live out here all alone?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. "Just me and my horse." She looked around the cabin. It was simple but carefully kept. Tools hung neatly on the wall. A worn guitar rested in the corner. A small wooden table held a lantern and 2 cups of coffee. "Don't you ever get lonely?" she asked gently. Daniel smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. "Loneliness becomes quiet after a while. Like the wind outside, you stop fighting it and learn to live beside it." Emily studied his face. She could see the weight of untold stories in his eyes. "You lost someone," she said carefully. Daniel did not answer right away. Instead he looked into the fire, watching the flames shift and dance. "My wife and daughter," he said eventually. "A long winter took them both." Emily felt her heart tighten. Suddenly she understood why this man lived far from everyone else. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Daniel shrugged lightly, though the pain was still there. Life doesn't ask us if we're ready for loss. Silence returned for a moment. Then Emily looked down at the floor and spoke quietly. "I think I was losing myself too, just in a different way." Daniel looked at her. She continued speaking slowly, as though each word carried years of pain. She described the way people in town had treated her as if her dreams didn't matter. How every day she felt smaller and weaker, until she barely recognized the person she had become. "I kept telling myself things would change," she said. "But they never did." Daniel leaned back in his chair and watched her carefully. Then he said something simple, but powerful. "Emily, the moment you walked away from that life, things already started changing." She looked up at him, confused. "But I have nothing," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "You have courage. Most people stay trapped forever because they're afraid to take the first step." Those words hit her like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. No one had ever called her courageous before. For the first time that night, Emily smiled. A small smile, but real. The fire crackled warmly between them as the storm slowly began to weaken outside. Daniel stood and placed another log on the flames. Then he turned back to her and spoke the words that would change her life forever. "Emily," he said gently, "you're not a burden to the world. You're someone who survived it." Tears filled her eyes instantly. All the pain, doubt, and fear she had carried for years suddenly felt lighter. In that quiet cabin, beside a stranger who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, Emily felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun rose slowly over the snowy valley, painting the hills in soft golden light. Emily stepped outside and looked at the peaceful landscape, amazed she had survived the night. Daniel stood beside her on the porch. "The road will be clear by afternoon," he said calmly. Emily nodded slowly. Then she turned to him. "You know, I almost didn't knock on your door last night," she admitted. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" She smiled shyly. "Because I thought nobody would care." Daniel looked out over the bright valley and said quietly, "Sometimes the world surprises us when we least expect it." Emily took a deep breath of the cold morning air. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt wide open, and it all began with a whisper at a cabin door during a storm. And if this story touched your heart, remember that sometimes a few kind words can change someone's entire life. If you enjoy stories about hope, courage, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join our storytelling family. Your support helps us share more powerful stories that remind the world kindness still exists.